Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? The Epicurean question of the problem of evil is generally employed as a critical tool to challenge the existence of this theist God in its entirety, and it does so, successfully. But for Milton's Satan, this cannot be the case, since he knows that God exists. This is an interesting turn, but even more interesting is that for Satan, the problem of evil still applies, but in another context, in another vein. And what is this vein? It is that for Satan, God is not good. Milton's Satan knows that tyranny is an evil. The demands of submission, backed by threat of punishment, is the inevitable fulfillment and distilling of this evil. And this means that evil existed before Satan's rebellion. That in fact, God being the originator of all things is the fons et origo mali, that is, the very origin of evil itself. And as demanded by any great character, Milton's Satan is complex and full of subtleties in both thought and trait. Certainly, just as Milton pours his inner conflicts onto these pages, so too is his Satan contrived, complicated, serpentine, and bursting with nuance. The following passage colors this in beautifully. Upon first seeing Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, Satan says of them that they are those whom his thoughts pursue with wonder and could love, so lively shines in them divine resemblance. Now, to make an axiomatic yet necessary point here, it is of course the heavens which resemble us and not the other way round. But accepting Milton's literary point, it's interesting to notice that by deduction, Satan has rebelled against the very God that he loves. This is a profound and categorically and in fact anti-biblical perspective, a perspective burgeoning with intense psychological and moral implications, since it means that Satan moved against the very object of his love for the realization of liberty, dignity, and the right to self-determination, undeniably a great sacrifice, one which requires nobility, integrity, and uncompromising rectitude. On this integrity, and on his way to Eden, writhing in his sufferings and looking for some semblance of respite, he's involved in introspections concerning his tragic fate, and says, "Me miserable, which way shall I fly? Infinite wrath or infinite despair? Which way I fly is hell, myself am hell, and in the lowest deep, a lower deep still threatening to devour me opens wide, to which the hell I suffer seems a heaven. Oh, then at last relent. Is there no place left for repentance? None for pardon left? None left but by submission, and that word disdain forbids me." Milton here emphasizes Satan's contempt for genuflection and submission, and even, and perhaps especially, to the one that he loves, which deters him from any such capitulations, accepting instead his inevitable and everlasting excommunication, his utter doom and bottomless misery as a necessary consequence of achieving selfhood, and accepting it despite the agonies he must endure along his path. So, outcasted, rejected, scorned and exiled to the depths of depths, one is forced to ask, what possible dignity could there be left for him to consider? What grace for him cast out of so-called grace itself? What poise or self-respect for one lowered lower than any had ever been before him? But this much is glaring, that for him to return to the fold of servility and obedience would be the greatest of all losses, because for this grand Miltonian figure, submission is true slavery. For him, even if the heavens are decked with rewards eternal, to relinquish one's self-worth and grovel for pleasures, to bow as if a domesticated animal would bow for its food, is the very prostration of the spirit. It is a subjugation of self to that which glitters but is not gold, empty coinage disguised as something of value. Even when prima facie strictly adhering to doctrinal biblical exegesis and attempting to present Satan to us in all his villainy and subterfuge, Milton's refined and contemporary interpretations betray his latent thoughts on the actual, that is to say, the real-world relationship between knowledge and power. Heeding the biblical description of the fateful tree in the Garden of Eden as the tree of knowledge of good and evil, Milton has Satan say, "O sacred, wise and wisdom-giving plant, mother of science, now I feel thy power within me clear, not only to discern things in their causes, but to trace the ways of highest agents deemed however wise." The discernment of things in their causes and the apprehension of the chain of causation is the very foundation of science. It is the beginning as well as the end of posing the why and the how question, and fundamentally it is a critical move away from magical thinking out into the rational world of light. This mother of science fragment, however, in the interests of equity, true equity, takes place in the Garden of Eden while Satan has taken on the form of the serpent to beguile and persuade Eve to eat of the fruit of the tree in question. But to refute any predictable accusations of his being wholly and merely deceitful, since his objective is the ruin of humankind, notice that the following soliloquy unravels as he watches Adam and Eve's intimacy from afar, when there is none in his presence except for the faithful reader. "One fatal tree there stands of knowledge called, forbidden them to taste. Knowledge forbidden? Suspicious, reasonless. Why should their Lord envy them that? Can it be a sin to know? Can it be death? And do they only stand by ignorance? Is that their happy state, the proof of their obedience and their faith? Hence I will excite their minds with more desire to know, and to reject envious commands invented with design to keep them low, whom knowledge might exalt equal with God's." It cannot go unnoticed to even those with a partially blunted historical and political sense that tyrants always inevitably attempt to control knowledge, to stunt it, to retard and suppress it, and where possible to extirpate it wholesale. The burning of books in our most shameful histories and presents is just one of the customary forms that this destruction of knowledge has taken. Any enlightenment that has come to us has come from science, philosophy, and critical thinking, namely from knowledge and its fruits. In other words, to adjudicate the punishment for consuming the fruits of knowledge as death, whether physical or spiritual, is to make a tyrant's declaration. And the appeal to one's own position in the attempt to affirm one's own legitimacy to enact these laws is rightly judged by Milton's Satan as a non sequitur, abhorrent to serious thinkers of every stripe. But this fallacy of the type argumentum ad verecundiam, better known as the appeal to authority, is what the age-old story of power and subjugation is built upon, and even more sinister is the appeal to one's own authority. But unfortunately for the faithful, such declarations are, to crucify a phrase, taken for gospel.
The written world